Welcome to the Catching Up podcast, where we move at the speed of conversation. I'm Harry.
And I am Max.
And today, we're catching up on Game of Thrones Season 8. So, Harry, what did you think of Game of Thrones Season 8? Well, I'm sure that most people could probably say it was disappointing. I've not actually heard anyone say that the season was great or excellent or anything of that kind of train of thought. It's not been particularly positive, especially the last 3 episodes, but that's the consensus of everybody else. And I think that the whole thing felt fairly rushed, and that most of the things that were happening were not really happening as a result of reason, thought, or decision making of anything like that. It just felt like it had to happen, therefore it is happening. So we don't have much we don't have much motivation from any of the characters for what they are doing. It felt like it was more of just a necessity throughout the whole of the season for everything that was happening, just to seal the deal. It's the last thing, or it's the last season even, and there's obviously not going to be anything more beyond that. So everything that kind of made the show good has been sort of inverted, probably for the sake for this purpose of them getting everything wrapped up in 8 seasons, and with less time as well. I'm sure everyone knows as well that this is the shortest season episode-wise. I don't actually know if it is length-wise, if it actually totals up to 10 hours like the rest of them do, but you can kind of feel that in this season more than any of the others, that everything was rushed and that we had to kind of come to this conclusion as soon as possible, probably down to the writing more than anything else. Because I certainly think that a lot of the production is as good as it ever has been. In fact, it probably exceeds everything that it's ever done before in terms of spectacle and I would, in some regards, say performance as well, because I think of that one scene with Jon and Sam, when Sam tells him who he really is. That was probably some of the best acting in the whole series. But at the same time, there are always these things with because the writing, I'm sure, like you've even said yourself before in previous conversations, Max, that the writing is or the story is the bones of the whole thing that keeps it upright. And when that fails, everything else feels worse as a result. So in that way, I think it's a good sort of segue into asking you now, what did you think of Game of Thrones Season 8?
Well, I could keep it very short in basically saying I can't disagree with pretty much anything you said. I think it is very important to note that everything else was really good. Like you said, the production was great. I hear something along the lines of it took them 50 nights to film the battle for episode 3.
Oh my God.
Things like that. And, all the actors and stuff, while they seem quite disappointed and melancholy, they still gave it their all. And I feel like, as disappointed as I was with Tyrion, I think Peter Dinklage still did an amazing job playing Tyrion to the best of the writing that was given. And, Kit Harington was great as always, as pretty much our main character, I suppose. But yeah, it was just okay. I won't say it was terrible. I don't think it was bad, but the real problem is that it was just okay, where it should have been much, much more. We've been so used to Game of Thrones being this groundbreaking, excellent thing, where this season, and I would perhaps argue even the previous season and maybe even the season before that, felt sort of like how The Hobbit feels to Lord of the Rings, Like The Hobbit was just okay. It was a story that was unfolded, and that's pretty much it. And I feel like that was Game of Thrones. As you quite rightly said, they just had to get through everything, and it did feel like they had a checklist of, right, well, we gotta get rid of Night King, we gotta beat Winter, we gotta beat Cersei, and we gotta decide who's gonna be king, and we're gonna do it as fast as we can.
Do you think that they have it's difficult to describe in one word this feeling of maybe they have just been working on it for too long now. Like, I was watching an interview with George R. R. Martin, who was saying, I'm sure the actors probably want to play some other roles other than the ones that they've been stuck with for the past 8 years. Do you think that that's kind of something that's tied into this season and maybe the last one as well?
Well, I know that's the story with Harry Potter, wasn't it? The three of them were very much tied down to what they did, and as soon as the Harry Potter franchise was done, they all split off and very quickly tried to break away from that role. But I don't know. I've watched a few behind the scenes stuff with the cast, and they all seem pretty invested in the sense of they all seemed quite emotionally sort of disappointed and perhaps a bit frustrated. I think they are more in the camp of they wanted to end it correctly. Once you've invested so much time into something, you want to make sure it ends correctly. I don't know. Obviously, we will probably never know. It didn't seem like they were bored. I don't think any of the performances really faltered that much.
Oh, right.
It was
I meant perhaps more in the writing zone than anything else, because, like you said, I know the exact kind of thing that you're talking about. There was one person who was on the production team for the destruction of King's Landing, who just puts all their heart and soul into it, and you can just tell from what they're saying that this is their passion, and everything that's gone into it has now sort of that this is the last time they're going to get it. And obviously the visual aspects and the production side of it has always been absolutely top notch.
But like I said, got better every season.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, perhaps more with, if we're looking at it from Benioff and Wise's point of view, that they're the ones that have got to sort of stitch everything together, considering they don't have the final 2 books to kind of they don't have that to work off of. They're kind of they've only got the little post-it notes from Martin of saying, this must happen and this must happen. I probably would assume the Night King being killed by Arya and Daenerys burning down King's Landing would be 2 of those post-its. But I mean, like, I have a feeling that they probably are just sick of stitching and perhaps wanted to do something where they didn't feel as constrained to please everybody, but also subvert their expectations simultaneously.
Well, firstly, I want to disagree with those post-its. I don't actually think that that will be what happens in the books, and that's based on hearing what Martin has to say about it, and also hearing what Benioff and Wiseman had to say in the inside the episode things.
Oh, right.
It seemed like their decision that they wanted I to do. Anyway, but we can get onto that later. Your answer to your question, yes, when clarifying it that much more, for sure. I don't actually have any evidence of this. I was just told this, so this could be incorrect, but they both have a project to move on to do Star Wars in some form or fashion now, and apparently Martin, to some extent, and HBO actually wanted it to be Game of Thrones, that is, wanted it to be 10 seasons long, but they were the ones who pushed it to be 8. So I think you're right on the money in that they definitely. It might not be that they've had enough. It might just be that they are quick to spread their wings now that they're a lot more famous, and they're probably thinking, well, we're getting paid for Game of Thrones, so let's hurry up and get paid for something else, right?
Oh yeah, sure. I'm sure. Yeah, their careers will probably be on the something that they're going to be considering more as they leave the biggest TV show perhaps ever.
This century, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And I'll definitely be interested to see where they go with it. But yeah, do you want to talk about some more specific points now? Because I'm sure we've kind of got the general gist of what we thought now. So maybe the first thing we could go to is the first half being in the north, isn't it? With the Long Night being the final conclusion of the Night King story, shall we say?
Yeah.
What what did you think of the build up, and the final moment of the Arya killing the Night King?
I really liked the build up. I liked episode 1 and I liked episode 2. I know quite a few people were sort of like, episode 2 was so boring, nothing really happens. It's just everyone talking. But I think that's the reason why I like it. It's that calm before the storm type deal. And it was really nice just to see everyone moving together and, cracking jokes before the inevitable. And it made it really feel like that the payoff was going to be big, dark, and, it was going to be something that's going to be, never forgotten. And I then don't think that happened. I think episode 3 was irritating, slodgy, somewhat annoying, and it had surprises and it subverted your expectation, but that doesn't mean it was good. I don't think that it was right, quotes right. I don't think it was right for Arya to have been the one to do it. I mean, I believe that Martin has already spoken out on this himself. He was in an interview where he sort of said, if you've written the whole book to say that the butler did it, and then people on the internet, before you finished, go and start theorizing, thinking, oh, the butler did it, he murdered our main character, whatever. So then because people have predicted it, you then change it, so then it was the Chambermaiden who did it instead. Well, then the book's going to be rubbish, because all these things that you've set up and that you've placed down now don't make any sense. So, to translate that, Jon came back from the dead via the power of the Lord of Light. He faced off against the Night King twice, once in Hardhome, once in the barren wilderness when they were all trying to run away and Dany came to save them. He is clearly the antithesis of the Night King. He is clearly, it was built up and shown to us that this man is the what is it, the men that protects the realms of men, the shield that protects the realms of men.
The light against the dark, yeah.
Exactly. And then in the inside the episode for episode 3, they say, oh, Jon has been our hero from the start. He's been our sort of main character, if you will. But it didn't feel right for him to be the one to finish off the Night King. And I sort of was very confused. What you think that Arya is? I don't really understand why. It doesn't. And so it sort of feels like, to take that analogy, that everyone was like, I predict that Jon Snow will kill the Night King. And so then the writers were just like, okay, well, because everyone knows that that's going to happen, let's just change it for the sake of changing it. So it was surprising that it was Arya, but I don't think it was satisfying.
I think the era of speculation kind of ended with episode 3, because even after episode 2, I was still under the assumption that, or I was even open to the possibility that everyone in Winterfell was just going to get completely annihilated, and it would all just be down to Cersei with, I don't know, wildfire or whatever, to kind of counter off everything else. And I'm sure, obviously, that doesn't really leave a lot of room for all of these other characters that have been built up over the years to kind of have any real purpose in the story if they were all to be killed. But by the same token, we probably thought that Robb Stark had some and Catelyn had some purpose to it, but obviously they were knocked out years ago. But and that was why I was still open to this idea. But I think that you're right about the Arya being kind of it just being a bit of an odd choice, because when I think about what she did in season 7, where she was essentially just pretending to be really horrible and deathly towards Sansa, just so that there could be a quick turnaround, that they would then get rid of Littlefinger, it just seemed kind of strange that this, all the time that she has been building up to this is now just used as the I don't want to use the word catalyst, that the hand of God, like the Deus Ex Machina, to get rid of the rest of it, just because she trained for a couple of seasons, kind of diminishes everything that she did before that. And I know that, like, I can kind of justify her being the one killing the Night King just because of her association and involvement in death as a recurring theme. But at the same time, when you're juggling all the things that she had previously done, and then to sort of push aside the one person that should do it and put her in there instead, I can understand the frustration. But it's interesting you said that you liked the first two episodes. I think I was probably kind of on the other. Perhaps I have the reverse opinion, where I thought that it kind of, the first episode started quite dully. The second episode had quite a few interesting moments, but then the long night comes along, and I was still really, when watching it, really engaged. Like, I felt far more into the idea of the final battle happening than I was just having to sit and wait for it to come along. And I know that the show isn't about the big battles and all of the kind of cataclysms that will follow, but I think when it's been building up to it for so long, I couldn't help but feel a bit disappointed that they had to put it off for a couple of more episodes. But then by the same token, if they had have had the long night as the first episode of season 8, and then we just had the rest of it all dragged out so that it would lead up to, like, because everything that happens after the long night for me was sort of the ship has sailed, we're kind of going on to stupid territory. If that had been dragged out for 5 episodes instead of 3, I probably would have been even more frustrated with the series.
I think people expected that the battle would be 2 episodes long. That perhaps episode 2, the first half, would have been them all, still preparing and talking, and then halfway through the episode, this is it, the battle has begun, and then the battle wouldn't then end until perhaps 3/4 of the way through to the next episode. I think that's why people were disappointed with episode 2, because they had fully expected that the battle would have started then and then ended in episode 3. There are things which annoy me, which probably didn't even cross your mind, like the way that the battle was handled. Was tactically sloppy and stuff like that.
The military side of it, you would probably have thought out a bit more than I did, because it wasn't until I watched the Alt Shift X video, like a few days after. I still haven't
seen those, actually. I need to.
He still hasn't finished the last one yet, but as of now, when we're recording. But when I watched that, and he was saying about how you have things like the trebuchets behind in front of the wall, and then the soldiers in front of them, and throwing
behind them. The Unsullied were behind the trebuchets.
Even still, yeah, that's what I mean. Like,
which was
silly. The terminology itself kind of would have confused me anyway, because I'm not I don't really think about these things too much. But it was nice to have them kind of pointed out at the same time, because it would only make sense to me if somebody had pointed it out, and it would never have occurred to me otherwise. And like I say, it's interesting now hearing that you thought it was the other way, like that it went kind of from good, bad, instead of sort of bad, better, and good by the end, because of how the actual strategies were planned out. Because because after you mentioned that, everything kind of feels a little more silly than it than I perhaps perceived it initially. Like, now that I think about it in this present moment, I wondered why on earth the battle kind of stopped, so that Arya could have that scene in the library. And that bit, like, it was exciting to watch, but at the same, when I think about it in retrospect, I wonder why it does just stop. It feels like such a strange change of pace. That just as one example, but do fill us in on some of the sort of strategies that were missed out on, or maybe some kind of things that maybe I hadn't picked out on either, because because you've got perhaps less of a you're thinking about this episode less positively than I am. I'm interested to hear what you thought of it, like in this sort of the strategy point of view.
Well, very quickly, the writers defend that scene of Arya in the library by saying that they wanted to change the pace because they felt like if the whole episode was just high octane battling, then it would have become numb, and by the end of the episode, we would be in that state of mind where we're just like, oh, it's just dumb fighting. But by them having that library sneak about scene, it then means when we got back to the fighting, it was then meant to have refreshed our palate. That was their defense as to why they did that, just because that might have been quite interesting to you.
Oh,
But
really?
yeah,
Okay.
but a quote was brought to my attention when watching that episode. I believe it was either Ned Stark who directly said it to Jon, or Jon was telling someone else that Ned Stark had told him that. And the numbers aren't going to be accurate, unless I'm lucky. I think he said something like Winterfell could defend against 10,000 men with only 1,000, or something like that, right? He basically says, oh, Winterfell is impregnable, Winterfell is amazing. And then it's sort of like the joke is that, however, Ned Stark never told Jon how, clearly, because even though this is the army of the dead, and they clearly don't suffer from the same penalties that the living do in terms of a siege, it was just so silly that they it felt like like the Battle of the Bastards felt so gritty and real. And I'm not going to say that was perfect either, but it was so much better. You had like shield walls and all the things that we never really get to see in I guess, historical footage, because we're all so blinded by the limelight spectacle. But I don't want to waste loads of time on nitpicking what strategies were ineffective and stuff like that.
Okay,
But
sure.
it did feel like the obvious ones that you've already mentioned. That they had the castle walls, which everyone really should have been behind or on. Then just in front of the walls, they have this pit filled with oiled wood, like a fire pit, a fire trench ready. But then they put all the soldiers in front of it. Why? Why would you not just put the fire trench in front of your troops? And then, in front of your troops, you have placed trebuchets. Why? They should be either behind the castle walls or just in front of the castle walls if they really cannot fit. And then in front of your trebuchets, you have a load of cavalry that has been already quoted in the show as being nigh undefeatable on an open plain. By I think it was Robert Baratheon says that to Ned, and we it's proven to us in season 7 when we see them absolutely destroy the Lannister forces, and it's correct. You don't charge light cavalry into thick, strong units like that. They will just get demolished, which is what happens. Although apparently not, since we then see them return in King's Landing, even though that was all strange.
I was going to say as well, it was quite sort of horrific. The Dothraki getting sent off into the wilderness of darkness I really liked it from the spectacle point of view, but then when they show up later on as though the entire army just hadn't been killed by the dead, like you kind of touched on, that it was very strange to see them again, especially in the finale, just standing outside the castle, just wailing and shaking their araks around. It's like,
and there was quite a lot of them, and they even said inside the episode for episode 3, they said Jon and Dany basically stand there and watch the end of the Dothraki people. And when we're all waiting there, you see maybe 1, 2, maybe 4 or 5 horses running back, and you see Jorah Mormont, he comes back, but no one else returns. Definitely not enough for the amount that we see in King's Landing. It is very, very strange and very sloppy. And then the other thing that really irritated me, and that'll be the last of my tactical irritations, is when they all retreat behind the wall and they set a light to the fire trench. They all just stand there. The men, not the undead, they all just stand there as if like, that's it, we've won. And it's only when the undead then start piling their bodies on the fire to put it out, then it's, I can't remember who shouts it, probably John, says, man the walls! Man the walls! Well, you should have been manning the walls while they were unable to get through the fire trench. You should have been shooting them the entire time. Why did you stop shooting them? They are not going to go away. I think the only thing that I truly
didn't have enough anti-white arrows to
apparently
kill them all.
But they thought that shooting a fire trench with arrows was going to work, which was really satisfying actually, because that is exactly what would happen. Because fire arrows are bullshit.
Well, but it would have still been. I was like, I remember sitting and watching the bit where Melisandre just happened to be there at the right place at the right time once again, and I kept thinking to myself, does nobody just have a torch that they can throw at it or something?
Yeah.
No, we have to have this big dramatic moment of her saving the day once again. And
which, by the way, I thought that was quite funny as well. When she turns up and she makes all of their kopeshes light up with fire, that there's the Dothraki scythe blades are called. Yeah. I sort of thought, wait a minute, what were they going to do if she didn't turn up? They were just going to charge? But then they're not using obsidian or dragonglass, I should say. They were just going to charge them with steel? Like, are you stupid? Like, what do you mean? I mean, I'm sure the Dothraki were probably like, oh, we're not going to use this horrible dragonglass stuff. It's rubbish. But you know, maybe that's why they were sent in, because they were just being uncooperative. And
or maybe the writers were just bloody sick of writing them into the script.
Yeah. I mean, but Melisandre was a little bit of a shame. Like that felt like a big write-off for no reason. And when she dies, like she goes off into the snow and dies, I kind of felt like it was okay, I was wrong about nearly everything. I'm just going to go kill myself now because fucking she didn't do anything right, did she really? Like, she thought that loads of people were the not Lord of Light, the Azor Ahai, the chosen one, the prince that was promised. And then it ends up being Arya. And then, like, we're meant to accept that the reason why Beric Dondarrion was brought back from the dead 19 times or whatever it was, I think it's the Hound that says 19 times, was just to save Arya in that one moment so then she could go on to kill the Night King. Is that really the reason that we're meant to accept? Because that's the reason that's given. Melisandre's like, oh, you know, the Lord of Light brought him back for a purpose, and that purpose has been fulfilled. And then she like stares at Arya as if to say, well, go on then. Off you go. And it's like, oh, okay.
Yeah. The most fascinating thing to me, just as somebody who's read the first 3 novels, is that Beric is already done and dusted with. Like, he gives his life so that Catelyn Stark can basically come back to life.
Yeah, and then she helms the Brotherhood Without Banners, doesn't
exactly.
she?
Yeah,
as Lady Stoneheart.
Even weirder is that, like, it's so kind of untouched in the novels as far as I'm aware. Like I say, I've only read up to Feast of Crows. I've only dabbled in a couple of the chapters, but like that's just as far as I got with the books. But as far as I'm aware, like she rules the Brotherhood Without Banners with an iron fist. Like she'll go around hanging people just for whatever reason. Like I said, I can't remember. It was a few years ago since I did read them. But even still, like when you think about the non-existent Brotherhood Without Banners in the show, that is just essentially made up of your favorite characters that may or may not have died and should be in other places according to the books, the Hound. But yeah, it's that usual thing.
I think the only satisfying thing I found was with Arya's persistence for wanting that special weapon made by Gendry. It gets mentioned quite a few times. She's like, "Make this weapon. Have you made it yet? Make mine first," type thing. And then we do actually get quite a satisfying payoff where we see her doing her water dancing technique that she's been trained for, and she's got this brilliantly dexterous weapon which complements her fighting style astronomically and her size very well, because obviously she's a small person, so she's not going to be very strong, and the way that she handles the weapon is very satisfying, and you can really appreciate that with all the choreography and stuff that yeah, she's actually very, very capable of handling herself, and you can quite clearly see that she may be one of the greatest fighters that Westeros has seen, just through that very short 3-minute segment or whatever of her just butchering dozens and dozens and dozens of whites with this weapon. And I even think, like, for most of it, I think she's got like her left hand behind her back, like keeping balance, as she's just like one-handedly like spinning this thing, and it was that was nice. But yeah, apart from that, the Night King getting bested by her was not expected, but that doesn't mean it was a good twist. And
Well, the weirdest thing is that when I watched that and her sort of literally the moment that the dagger fell into her hand and it went in, I screamed the word yes. Like I couldn't help myself. You know, it was just something that came out when I watched it. So it's weird that, like I say, it fits, and I did enjoy it myself. But at the same time, I can completely understand why it doesn't work simultaneously.
don't get me wrong, in the moment, I was like, oh, excellent. You know, I mean, I think my roller coaster of emotion was, you know, we see Theon obviously get his ass handed to him quite, like, you know, on purposely. And then the Night King's walking towards Bran, and I'm sitting there going, this is it, Bran. If you're like some mad Yoda, like with force powers or something, this is it. What are you going to do? You know, we see him like warging that massive group of crows, and I thought there was going to be a payoff of that, and then there wasn't. And then Arya jumps from the shadows, and I was sort of like exhilarated with, oh my god, and then he catches her, and I'm like, oh god, is Arya now going to die? Is that what happens? And then I started thinking, well, no, this is Bran's opportunity to do whatever he's going to do. And then Arya gets the blow, and I was like, oh shit, that just happened. I think it's skipping forward quite a bit, but I had the same thought when the Hound was fighting the Mountain, which I know is a huge conversation in of itself, but there was just so much, yes, go on, get him. And, you know, he plunges that dagger into his head, and I was like, yeah, he got him. And then you see the hand reaching up to pull it out, and I was like, you bastard. Well, how are you fucking gonna die? And there were some great yup moments, but I just feel like that, I mean, really, since season 5, if I'm being honest, like, you know, season 6, 7, and 8 has been less Game of Thrones and more like Lord of the Rings with dragons. You know, it's detracted a lot away from the very complicated and nuanced political systems and you know, all the really interesting dialogue, and it's just been replaced by, well, we've got these calamities and these big battles that need to happen. And I think it is not emphasized, or rather I should say it's not personified any more clearly than with our boy Tyrion. In this season, Tyrion just feels stupid, worthless, and like, yeah, I love seeing him, and him being there is great, but he was not at home thematically, you know?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Do you know, the thing was, I was having a good long think about this, and I realized that I don't think I was unhappy with Daenerys suddenly snapping, shall we say, in episode 5. It was more that everything that had built up to it was just so like teeth-grindingly annoying, especially in regards to Tyrion and Varys and Littlefinger. You know, they're like the three main players in like the earlier seasons.
Yeah, they're meant to be
And
like the smartest men alive, aren't they? Really, the three of them.
and well, it's like I say, especially with Tyrion, who is just constantly making bad mistakes, and it's not really like it's not like it's something that shouldn't happen. It's more that I would think, especially in relation to episode 4, where there is a specific moment, and I can't exactly quote what any of the characters say, but it is Tyrion fundamentally who is setting out the plan in motion to essentially start the process of getting everybody over to King's Landing ASAP without, even considering the whole Iron Fleet thing. And now, obviously, the infamous clip of Benioff saying, Danny sort of forgot about the Iron Fleet is now ringing in my ears. But at the same time, it's the people around Daenerys that have kind of annoyed me the most, especially Tyrion. And because of let me just also segue into another thing that kind of irritated me about the first 2 episodes is because of this need to make Daenerys a bad guy over the course of a very short span of time. Obviously, lot of time is taking place in the show, as we know from, Series 7 is also infamous for this, where, characters are traveling such great distances in seemingly no time whatsoever. And then you'll have, where was I going with that? It was about the, because that, like I said, the plot has to make Daenerys the bad person now to justify what has to happen. And because the first 2 episodes are chock-a-block with people essentially not trusting Daenerys without any real kind of reason, because obviously if Jon has convinced everybody that the big battle that is going to be coming, the ultimate thing that everyone needs to be prioritizing is the fact that the Army of the Dead is coming. You would have thought that all of these factions would have put aside their kind of differences about having a foreign queen coming along, but they emphasized it so hard that it irritated me at first without me really knowing why, and now I can hit the nail on the head why it annoyed me so much, because like I said at the start of the podcast, it's like it had to happen. There wasn't a motivation for it, so therefore it happens all the same because of this time and all the other various factors. And we then end up with all of these characters being written badly, doing very strange things that you just wouldn't expect them to do.
Yeah, you do hit the nail on the head by saying that they have decided that this is going to happen, and they will make it happen no matter how short of a span of time it seems like has come across. And there was something you said at the beginning of that where you were sort of like you weren't too angry at like Daenerys' character switch during episode 5, and I think that's quite important because a lot of people were sort of saying that a lot of people were getting quite upset, and they were sort of saying that this wouldn't have happened. That's out of her character. It's irrational. It doesn't make any sense. It ruined the show, and I sort of was very confused because during the show when I was watching it, my thought was, "Oh my god, you stupid bitch. Like, what are you doing? Like, you're destroying your family's city effectively." And then where she's like attacking the Red Keep, I was like, do you realize that you're attacking your ancestral home right now? Like, and just like, you see all the women and children burning up and stuff. And I was just like, you absolute idiot. Like, what are you doing? Like, this is so insane. But that's not me saying that was wrong. Right? You can say when you say that, oh, it's irrational and that's totally out of her character. That is something that you are attributing to that character. That is the reason why you're upset. You can, that is in a way, that is the character development, isn't it?
Mm.
It's the anger that you feel for that scene is meant to make you feel that angry. It's meant to be irrational because it's meant to be showing that Daenerys has gone doolally and that she's not thinking rationally. She is insane now. And yes, it is not in her character because we've literally just spent the last 7 seasons of her building up and saying, I am not going to kill innocents. I am freeing all of these like slaves and stuff. And it's only now in this last season that she's twisted that mentality into saying, oh, yeah, but I'm going to be saving future generations from the slavery of a tyrant. And, she doesn't realize that, a bad character trait is sometimes just a bad character trait, not a poor written decision. So
Mm.
while I don't know if that should have been handled differently. I mean, if we were to rewrite the whole thing, if it were up to me, I don't think I would have had Dany go mad because I feel like that was a little bit of a disservice. I would have had Arya kill her because the North don't like her, and it would have been a testament to that men never change, as in man. I don't
Yeah,
mean the
yeah.
gender. I mean, man never changes. We say that we'll put our differences aside. We'll say that we'll work together. But even then, the petty squabbles would always get the better of us. I fully expected that it was going to end with, because we see Arya in King's Landing stalking around, and you see that scene where all the Unsullied are banging their spears, and Jon is like walking up to her with like this really sullen expression on his face, and he's like, "Oh my God, this is like literally like Darth Vader has risen. Like, this is really bad." And then you see Arya is like following Jon in like his shadow, like slinking off to the side. And in my mind, it was then that I made up the decision. I was like, oh my God, this is how it's going to end. Arya's going to kill Dany. Jon's going to absolutely hate that Arya did that, but kind of understand.
Mm.
And then Jon is going to have to reluctantly be the king who doesn't want to be king. And that would be the bittersweet ending of he's like the sad king. Like he lost the love of his life. He lost the honor and trust of his family. And he is king of a land that he doesn't want to be king of. Like it would have been the perfect, like, right? I mean, I don't
Yeah,
know if
yeah.
that's just me, but I feel like that would have been really poetic of, you could imagine that being written in poems and stories for ages to come of the sad king. We got Bran the Broken, it's a nice name. You would have had like the sad king or the melancholy king or something like that. And I felt like that was how it's going to end. But no, they just had to like really double down on the fact that apparently Dany has gone like batshit insane and
Oh no, no,
has
no!
this.
They just pulled a Last Jedi on us, man. Subvert all the
Oh Christ, yeah,
expectations.
that's it. That's it. If you
But
subvert all the
yeah.
expectations, then no one can be unhappy, right?
Oh, of course. Well, do you know, I just wanted to touch on one thing that you were saying about earlier, like with regards to if they did kill Daenerys in Winterfell, um, it would definitely tie up the whole man never changes thing. But I think that was something that the show kind of had at its core anyway. That there are no good and evil characters. They are just characters with extremely complex motivations, histories, bloodlines, all the rest of it, that are just acting for the most part in their own interests. And that's how it's unfolding in the kind of grand scheme that we as the audience have the privilege to see the whole land unfolding and changing as the show goes on.
I
But
don't think that ends up happening, though, does it?
no.
And I think that's the distinct difference between the earlier Game of Thrones and the later Game of Thrones. Is you're absolutely right. Is that the reason why this series is so popular and stuff is because we were trained particularly with, people who come to mind, like Jaime Lannister, we're trained to learn that he's not a good guy, but he's not really a bad guy either. And that's the same for everyone. They've just got their own stories, their own motivations. What isn't nice is when Arya purposefully goes with the Hound to go to King's Landing, and then she doesn't do anything else. I was expecting there to be a very big payoff there, and I was totally fine with the part where the Hound is like, "Girl, turn around. You don't want to be like me," and you see like the camera has got like a close shot of the Hound's face, and then it switches to Arya's face, and it is sort of like, yeah, if you go down this path, you're gonna end up a fucked up mess and probably die. And I thought that was quite sweet. It was him saving her life and basically teaching her, you don't need this vengeance. But we then get an absolutely incredible scene of her running through King's Landing, and I think that is probably the best scene in all of season 8, was her running through King's Landing with all the ash and fire and all the burnt corpses and stuff, and we get a lot of camera shots of just following her, very long shots. They were absolutely beautiful. I loved them. But then after that, she just sort of hangs around, and that's why I was so convinced then that while she was in King's Landing, she was going to be the one to kill Daenerys, because I sort of thought, well, why are you here? From a script point of view, like, yeah, of course, you can be, quote, realistic and say, well, she's there because she went to kill Cersei and it didn't happen. She's not going to disappear. But, scripts are written with purposes, aren't they, Harry? Like, what was her purpose? What was it?
Yeah.
Tell me.
Well, the thing with, jumping onto Arya's purpose, when a character only has one motivation, the rest of it just seems like it makes a character seem almost just boring, like at that point. Yeah. But just to say about Arya in particular, because the thought of Clegane Bowl, like, I knew it was going to come. I knew it was going to come, and obviously it did. But imagine if the fight was Arya and the Hound against the Mountain.
It would have been very epic, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and I know that obviously that it's the decision of the writers and the choreographers and all the rest to not put her in there. But when I see her looking so terrified, this is the girl who conquered not conquered, but, overcame death, for lack of a better phrase. I mean, she even gets stabbed in the belly several times and survives. So she has already, had her own sort of revival, if you like, even if it was a bit sort of sloppy in season 6. But, I honestly thought...
And she killed the Night King, who is the avatar of death.
Precisely. And then to see her really fearful in the last few episodes kind of just made me think, well, it didn't work for me, and I'm sure that it kind of draws out the human side to Arya, of course, but the way that they did it as well, I'll definitely give them credit for the beautiful cinematography of her running through King's Landing as it's burning, but the same damn extra.
But they could have still had that, couldn't they?
No. You know what I mean, though? With that woman and her child, that I could not have given a single shit about. And
it was odd, wasn't it?
Yeah, it annoyed me more because they had shunted the children in the first 2 episodes, and this is probably just because I because of my 2 videos that I did do on the Game of Thrones first 2 episodes of season 8. Like, I think I probably had more time to think about it in retrospect. But at the same time, when you have Arya changing so suddenly and not being this fearless fighter that she has been developed into, like, I would have at least liked to have seen her challenge the Hound verbally, maybe, like, in the just before the long night, she Beric and the Hound are sat outside for a bit, and she just doesn't care. Like, she's just completely different from the Arya that the Hound knew. And
And he even
then,
says it, doesn't he? He
yeah,
says, "You are a cold-hearted bitch, aren't you?" And that line, I remember just quickly. Sorry, yeah, that when he said that, and the camera cuts to her, and it's like this. It's a low shot looking up at her, and you sort of get the impression of, "Fuck, yeah, she isn't the same person anymore, is she? She's gone."
precisely, yeah. And if you could imagine, because I think what excites me more about the thought of Arya teaming up with the Hound more than anything is just because it would have made the fight fair. As much as the mountain is now an invincible zombie mountain, it still, I think, would have been a more interesting fight. And the other thing that kind of ruins Clegane Bowl, as epic as it was, I don't know if you picked up on this, but the sort of stairway that they're in, I don't think it's a set piece that I think they probably made it specifically for this scene, because I don't recognize it at all.
I
But
think you're right. Yeah.
the wall comes down, or maybe it's already down from the start. I can't remember. But every time they have a character in front of the big gaping hole that sees the city, it looked really fake. And it ruined Clegane Bowl for me. I think that the fight itself was great. Them, being them launching themselves into the fiery abyss was absolutely perfect. Would not have had it any other way. But the build up to it and everything else that kind of stood in between what had to happen just didn't either make a lot of sense or was just done for like comedic purposes. Like, I really laughed at Qyburn being killed in an instant.
Yeah, right.
But
That was great.
I think that it's once again one of these things that feels like, okay, so all of his kind of necromancy and strange activities was really all for nothing, apart from
Yeah.
just to make the mountain the mountain.
But to be fair, just on that last point, that feels more like Game of Thrones,
Oh
where
yeah, sure.
you have these characters have these ambitions and goals and tasks like Robb Stark and the Starks did at the Red Wedding, and then nope, they're just axed off, and that's just fucking life, that is. But something that I thought of, one of my friends said to me, which I absolutely loved, is that they said Clegane Bowl, that set of the staircase with the broken hole and the dragon intermittently flying through the background and like rubble falling from the sky every now and then, it felt like a video game boss. And I don't mean that in a bad way. Like, it felt like Dark Souls. I could really like imagine like epic Dark Souls boss music playing, where you've got these two different elevations of the mountain being on top, the Hound being underneath, or it felt like, those old PS2 Lord of the Rings games or something, as you're moving through like these rubbled city of Osgiliath or something like that. It really felt like the final boss had been reached, and the mountain was truly, in that moment, our main character, and the mountain truly, in that moment, was the main bad guy, and that, this fight meant everything. And like I said, with the dragon coming into the background, it very was much like I don't know, the ruins in Dark Souls 2 or something like that. I don't know if that rings any better, if you
Oh
agree
yeah,
now that I say it,
for
but
sure. I think
it
that
was definitely insane.
the lack of space as well. Like,
Yeah.
this wasn't like a big this wasn't done in front of the Iron Throne or anything. This is just some random staircase, and
That's
it
it.
almost made it feel quite claustrophobic, which is probably why it was so satisfying to see the Hound just smash right through it, and then you have the humongous shot of the two of them just falling into
the fire. But just backtracking a little bit, but obviously still being relevant with the idea of like Arya being turned away, and you said she felt quite fearful. I think I think I agree with you only now that you've just like sort of said it, and that I really appreciated in episode 3 when we saw her be fearful against the army of the dead. We see her literally just bolt sprinting away from them, because that makes sense. You're literally staring at bunches of zombies. Like, that would scare anyone. Like, no man would have stood the ground as long as her. But after that moment, yeah, I feel like that should have been her moment of fearful weakness. And that moving on, yeah, maybe she shouldn't have been deterred. And while I did like the conversation between the Hound and Arya and him effectively saving her life, I do think now that you bring it up that perhaps it would have been more interesting if they had fought the mountain together, and then perhaps the mountain knocks her down and, is about to kill her, and the Hound sacrifices himself by throwing himself out of the window to plunge to the death, sort of him saving her life when she never saved his life type thing, that would be sort of like a nice redemption arc or something. Or, it would have just been nice to bury the hatchet between these two characters who clearly have a complicated history of hating but liking each other. And it would have been nice for them to have just hashed it out together, fighting like effectively a common enemy, because in this recreation the mountain would be protecting Cersei kind of, and Arya clearly wants Cersei type thing.
Well, yeah, the other thing as well is that even I remember very well in season 4, the very first episode ends with Arya and the Hound going into like a pub or an inn, and you have that absolutely brilliantly coordinated fight sequence that just is probably one of the most satisfying, but also some of the most brutal sequences of action that you could possibly ask for. And it's just so interesting that in a localized smaller scene, I got way more out of it than than when they reunite and go all the way to King's Landing for one specific purpose that she doesn't
even do.
Yeah, she just shrugs off because fear. I don't know.
You bring up that scene of them in the pub, and I think it also contains possibly one of the best Hound lines ever spoken. I believe that's the point in which he says, if you don't shut your hole, I'm going to eat every last chicken in this room.
Oh, yes. Oh, my God. I remember that as well. Do you know what? I tell you what, if there's one thing as well that I do remember about that episode, and something about it might just be a happy coincidence, and I could be wrong as well, but I believe that one episode of season 4 is directed by DB Wise, and who directed the finale of season 8, DB Wise and David Benioff. Not that it really, because I know we were sort of mainly talking about episode 5, but it's just very interesting that in the space of about 5 years, the almost change in direction specifically has changed so much, because we were talking earlier about the long night, and I kept thinking as well, how are they going to top the battle between the Night's Watch and the what are the others? Yes, the Wildlings, back in season 4 as well. Another very epic episode for me, where I don't think we did have a minute to breathe. And yet,
I was gonna say the answer is they didn't.
Yeah,
they didn't.
But the thing is that when you were saying about there was an interview with one of the creators saying about how they wanted to change the pace. Yeah. I don't ever recall such a thing happening in that episode of season 4.
And nor with Battle of the Bastards or Battle for the Blackwater or any of the other battles, really, I don't think.
Precisely. And I think what is the main thing is that they just have better build-up. They start off nice and quiet, bubble it up, and then we have a big fight. Whereas with The Long Night, which has been set out as, we are strictly going to make this an hour and 15 minutes. So we do have to pace it more like a movie than, one big episode of Game of Thrones, which is obviously quite annoying for someone like me who has a great appreciation for, I can't remember the name of the director of the episode with the fight on the wall against the Wildlings, but that is a very clear sort of shift in terms of what they were aiming for, now versus then. But I didn't know if you wanted anything else to add, but I did have a little thing to say about Daenerys burning everything down before we talk about the final episode.
Yeah, I suppose a period of 5 years is quite a long time, isn't it? And as we were saying right at the start, it's clear that the writing has burnt out a little bit, and maybe they couldn't be bothered to think of creative and interesting dialogue or ways in which the Mountain and Arya would interact during that fight. Equally, though, I will give them credit in I can imagine a lot of people would be disappointed if Clegane Bowl was interrupted by the fact that Arya was there as well. I think a lot of people probably would have come out of that saying, "Oh, why couldn't it have just been the Hound versus the Mountain?"
Yeah. Well,
people always want what they don't get, don't they?
Exactly. Yeah,
they would have found ways to do it.
That is definitely the case with Daenerys, and like we've talked at length about, whether it is right or wrong that she did do what she did. But like I said earlier, I can justify having Arya there with the Hound just because the Mountain is no longer a mortal, and
Agreed.
it's not that we kind of really knew that. It wasn't ever truly established. Apart from
the
obviously the
reveal was good, wasn't it? When he took off his helmet, I was like, "Holy shit, he is just a walking corpse."
Exactly. It gets even worse when the dagger goes into his head.
I thought that was it.
Yeah, and I think what it is that I went into Clegane Bowl expecting that kind of outcome, and obviously it happened all the same. But like I said, that if there are fans out there that would have said that it would have been bad if Arya was there, I just think that it would have been a fairer fight because of what had been built up in King's Landing and elsewhere with Arya and the Hound. But the other thing I wanted to say was that the biggest advantage with, or perhaps the greatest strength of episode 5 is that it becomes so hellish that even if we do try and argue about what characters would and wouldn't do in this scenario, like take the bit where Jon stops a Northman from raping a woman, because obviously we can go on about that all day long, because there are things that some people would do. It would make logical sense for Jon to do that, and obviously we've also said that it doesn't make a lot of sense Arya not fulfilling what she set out to do. But I think what the episode's strength is that because it is just so unbelievably catastrophic, and all, like, war crime levels of killing happening for no real reason, we are in a position, obviously, to a very fortunate position in that we are just mere spectators. These characters have had everything that they conceivably know of just shattered in front of their eyes, whether it be from the mere civilians on the ground or the people that are fighting at the top ranks of either Cersei's side or Daenerys' side. This is something that is so unbelievable and yet is happening that I think that anybody's rational or reasonable faculties are just going to get completely thrown to the side because it is so devastating.
Yeah, and I mean, they definitely let it linger. Even in the beginning of the next episode, I'll always remember when they're walking through the gates and you see that guy like a bloody hollow from Dark Souls, just like with the top layer of his skin shredded off, just like groaning, like just walking towards the front gate. And then they continue onwards and they just see a man sobbing just on the floor. Like, it really is like the beginning stages of Dark Souls, or like any of the games where it's just shattered ruins, ash everywhere, and just these like curled up balls of messes. Like everyone there, even the people who survived, are not truly alive anymore. They are psychologically shattered. They are like changed forever. And King's Landing as a city is not King's Landing really anymore. They really did destroy absolutely everything that was there to be destroyed. They didn't leave anything unscathed.
Yeah, no, now that you mention that bit, yeah, seeing him walking past
It's very
Tyrion,
harrowing.
yeah, especially Tyrion, especially because he's a small guy. It, let alone the scale of destruction that he's had to witness. The fact that he's going to see just one individual barely alive, who's even bigger than he is, that is a testament to the human spirit, shall we say, even in the most dire circumstances. And that those shots sort of tell that really well.
Yeah, and seeing all the burnt out corpses and skeletons and stuff like that is just a very, sort of like a very Pompeii image, isn't it? Really, of like all the, you see the people like hugging before their demise and stuff like that, and I really liked that they decided at the very least to keep everything that we saw at ground level. They could have very easily just had half of the shots like over the shoulder shots of Dany and the dragon like firing down, but they didn't. They kept it very grounded, and they kept it very much. They kept us in the blast zone, so then we would know what it would be like. There was something interesting that someone brought up to me, and I wanted to know if you had any opinions on it. At the end of episode,
before we jump onto that, because I had a thought as you were saying that. The now that you mention it, that is definitely another strength of it. And when I think back to the episode, the Long Night episode, where you have that ridiculous fight in the sky between the dragons, like I honestly could not tell you what was happening. Yeah. And I think that they probably made a far more intelligent decision not doing that kind of stuff in episode 5, just because it would have been so disorienting. And then when you do get the occasional shot of the dragon just sort of almost going around in zigzagging right away, all the way through from the start to the end, like it's just like it takes so long just for even this dragon to go around the whole thing. And imagining what would be going on, it's just brutal. But go on. Yeah, what was your question?
Someone asked me this question, and I didn't really have an answer for it. So you, who have a more decorous film degree, I wondered what you thought. To the end of episode 5, when Arya finds that white horse, and the question he asked me is, what do you suppose the white horse is meant to represent? Because in episode 6, there's no sign that horse was kept around for any reason. And it is a lovely shot where we see this bloodied horse and a few ray of lights come in, and she like reaches her hand up to it, and white horses are meant to be symbolic of quite a lot of things, and I just thought that it probably was meant to represent something, but I couldn't quite put my hand on it. And I would be genuinely interested if people in the comments have any like theories of what that would be. I'd love to read them and see what people think to it, because I just couldn't get my finger quite on it. I was like, this has got to be reminiscent of something, whether it's meant to be like representative of Arya's freedom from vengeance, or just meant to be like the ray of hope for humanity, or I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I have two thoughts about it, and it's honestly, I didn't really think of it as anything particularly significant, only because I have this kind of cynicism with the TV show now, that they put the kind of Lord of the Rings, Oscar bait kind of, should we say, aspects just sort of thrown in, whether there's any real intention behind it or not. So let's say again about the children that were kind of thrown in the first 2 episodes rather needlessly. And we know that that because of that alone and my own cynicism, my one thought would be that it is that very kind of it's just a very obvious use of contrast. So obviously you've got a very beautiful creature that has managed to withstand most of the, or just it could be completely not immune, but or just completely oblivious to everything that is happening around it. Obviously, because it's not running around crazy like you would expect an animal to perhaps be in its situation. Because it is just standing there, it's probably symbolic of something. But it is, on the other hand, I am dubious and perhaps thinking that it's just pretentious directors trying to put something beautiful in the midst of disaster, just for the visual flair of it, I think. But my other thought initially was that Bran had sent it, like that he had walked into it and sent it over to her to get, or, you know, just somebody, maybe even Jon, I don't know, just to get them out of the city. That was something that I initially thought about, but obviously because Arya does, I'm right in thinking Arya does stick around in King's Landing, doesn't she? She doesn't take the horse.
No, she gets on the horse and we see her ride out, but then the first scene in episode 6, there's no sign of a horse and she looks like she's still inside the city or something. It's very, very weirdly chopped up. But you're right, I would have thought that it was just like a needlessly nice shot, but they lingered on it for such a long time. But to be fair, the cogs got turning a little bit then when you were just explaining that and you were saying, you know, maybe it's just meant to be as simple as a beautiful creature that has managed to survive, or maybe that's meant to be reflective of that Arya is not a vengeful evil assassin, that she is also a beautiful creature who has managed to survive this mess or something like that. I don't know. I just felt like it was worth picking your brain at, because I was asked that question by a friend, and
I've done my best to answer.
Yeah, well, I sort of thought my philosophy only goes so far, and I thought maybe this is more of a filmic representation. So that's my
Should
thought
he or
to
she
you.
listen to this?
Oh, he will. He will.
Oh, good. Force him.
That's right, yeah. But I wanted to, just getting a bit conscious of the time, I did want to talk about Jaime Lannister, because I wanted to know how you felt about him, because I feel like that he was given a very unjust time in this season.
Do you know, I'm torn. I, on the one hand, completely understand. So I think, yeah, the main point of contention is the fact that he does go back to King's Landing, despite having the whole time of, like, when he returns to King's Landing without his hand with Brienne in season, well, it's at the end of season 3, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
So from 4, 5, 6, and then at the end of 7, he has had the whole time to basically make the decision, do I stay or do I go? And he goes. And then he just suddenly turns around and says, do you know what? Screw all that. Let's just go back because I love Cersei. And don't get me wrong, his impulsiveness is totally within reason. But at the same time, I can't help but think that they just wanted to have another big slap in the face for poor old Brienne, because it's not like she really had much to do after Jaime left her, as far as I can recall.
No, and she didn't really even put up much of a fight, vocally or otherwise, which I felt was quite out of character for her. Like, it seemed as if now that she'd been slept with, suddenly she was now like the housewife type thing. You know, all she could do is stand there and cry, where honestly, I would have purely expected Brienne, kind of as she was before the Battle of the Long Night, where she would have effectively like grabbed him and just like thrown him up against the wall and just say, right, you listen here, that like whore is not good for you. You stay here and you do what is right for yourself. But yeah, he was so all over the shop. There was a line which really irritated me when he's talking to Tyrion, And Tyrion's like trying to convince him. He's like, come on, help me here. I'll let you go. And he's like, I will, think of all the thousands of people that you will save by doing this. And what does he say? He says, I've never really much cared for them. And
Yeah.
my mind like split in two as I remember back to the scene, I think in season 3, it must have been in season 3, when Brienne and Jaime are in that hot tub and
Oh yeah.
Jaime is breaking down in front of her, and because she keeps calling him Kingslayer, and he's like, would you have stood there as your king gave the command to kill thousands of innocents? And he's crying, going, I couldn't do it. I couldn't follow the orders of my king, and I was a king's guardsman. And now apparently since then, not since season 3, since him betraying the Targaryen king, is it Aegon?
Yeah. Well, the Mad King. Yeah.
The Mad King. Well, yeah, Mad King. Since the time of him betraying the Mad King to now, he's decided that he doesn't actually care about the King's Landing citizens. Well, I have to say that I think that's bullshit. I think he does. I think Jaime Lannister does care about the innocents because all the evidence that we've been pointed to shows that he cares about the innocents. Or, apart from perhaps season 1, he was a cocky asshole in season 1, but that was fine. But
we have to remember. Yeah, sorry, go on, man.
That was just it. Since then,
it's the fact that he was willing to fight in the long night that proved more than without a shadow of a doubt that he cared about the people. Because otherwise, why would he have left? It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense at all.
And for him to say to Brienne, I'm a hateful man in the end, it's like, you're not, though. Like, you think it's the other way round. He thinks he's a hateful man, but he is a good man. Yeah. And it's proven when Brienne at the very end, and I thought that was so lovely, when she's writing in the Kingsguard manuscript, and she's writing down all the things that he did, and because previously all it said was that he joined when he was 16, and then he killed his king, and that was pretty much it. And then she adds all this stuff about how heroic and good he was, and I'm not saying that he shouldn't have gone back to King's Landing and that shouldn't have happened. I just feel like that the way, because what they wanted is they wanted Jaime and Cersei to die at the same time. And loads of people theorized that Jaime was going to kill Cersei, didn't they? Because of that scene where they're standing on the Westeros map, and she's standing on the neck, and he's standing on the fingers and stuff like that. But for the way they went about it, it made him seem like a callous, like ignorant man. And even in that scene, Tyrion is pleading with him, saying, "You are the only man who cared about me, the only person that cared about Tyrion." And it's like, that's Jaime Lannister. Jaime Lannister is not who Jaime is trying to make himself out to be. And I felt like that was such a shame because he was one of my favorite characters, and it was nice to see him have this internal struggle, only for him to sort of give up and make up excuses as to why he wouldn't help Tyrion. It was just like, I don't know, this doesn't feel right to me. But
well, this would have made for because now that you have mentioned this, actually, I got thinking about Jaime's involvement in the Battle of the Long Night, and how few of the main characters were, none of the main characters were killed off. Let's not beat about the bush, apart from Theon. And can you imagine?
And Jorah.
Of course, yeah. But I can't believe I forgot him. Jesus, that's bad. But anyway, I think Jaime would have been far suited better if he had had a really awesome death in episode 3, because then we would have a reason for Brienne to be so unhappy and for her to start writing in the book, because he abandons her. Why the hell is she still writing all his good stuff? Like, she just suddenly forgiven him?
Well,
It just
she's
didn't-
honourable, isn't she? She is the best of knights, isn't she? And
Oh, I know,
she
I know.
understands that.
But
But I
what-
understand
yeah.
your sentiment.
When they the fact that Jamie, I honestly would have just been far happier if he had a great death during the long night, or
It
even
could have
have a few
been-
other characters that died in the long night. But the main thing that I think the writers have hidden behind to get Jamie back there was the fact that Cersei is quote unquote pregnant, which
Yeah.
obviously never led to anything either, perhaps only to, like I say, get or drag Jamie kicking and screaming back to King's Landing, which makes even less sense because we know it's only Cersei that really cared about the children. Like, of course, Jamie does care about the children, but it's so far gone now. His whole time of him witnessing or just experiencing all of his children dying, and then to have the promise of another one coming along. Like, I'm even surprised that he believed her, that Jamie didn't even think for a second, maybe she's just lying. She has been so horrible this whole time. That's why I left for the wall in the first place. And it's not like if he had two motivations that kind of have dragged him in two separate directions, which I've got no real issue with. It's more that the pregnancy was probably only
It's quite weak,
used
wasn't
for that.
it?
Yeah, it was only used for that one function of getting Jamie back to King's Landing.
Yeah. And now that you say him dying in episode 3, we could have had it be Jamie to face off against the dragon instead of Jon. We get those scenes where Jon is pinned down by the dragon because then he can't get to the weirwood tree because of it. I mean, that could have been Jamie. Jamie's already fought off against a dragon, and perhaps it could have been quite epic, not for him to kill the dragon, but for him to fight off the dragon, perhaps giving Jon the time he needed to get to the weirwood tree. And then this time, instead of running away from, or no, not running away from, because Bronn saves Jamie when he fights against Drogon. Well, this time he doesn't have someone to save him. He saves Jon, and then perhaps he could have died to Viserion. I think it was Viserion was the name of the Night King's dragon. That could have been a nice end for him.
I forget the names of the dragons now that you mention it.
It's Drogon, Viserion, and I don't remember the third one.
Rhaegar, or something based on Rhaegar.
Was it? Okay.
Yeah. I'm fairly certain of it because she names them after her siblings, and I think Drogon was just the one that was like, it's dragon with an O. I got a bit lazy with that.
Drogo.
Oh yeah, of
Perhaps.
course. God, I can't believe. See, do you know that this is such a funny thing because I'm watching all this on Now TV. All of the other seasons are available for me to watch, and I'm just all the way through watching season 8. I kept thinking to myself, I would probably be happier just re-watching seasons 1 to 4,
right?
Because they're my favorite seasons. And the worst bit is that I was always very unhappy with season 5, a bit happier with season 6, but I would take 5 and 6 over 7 and 8. Like, it's so strange.
Again, it was like when thinking back, to that hot tub scene of Jamie breaking down, I was just thinking about how powerful that was and how great it was. And, when Daenerys is freeing the slaves in Yunkai and stuff like that, that's so much more interesting and great. And when we had Barristan Selmy and Jorah Mormont and all these characters who were really in depth and great, but The last thing
Every
I
scene
wanted
had significance and built up to something. That's exactly it. Yeah.
And now, because of season 8, a lot of those scenes that were building up to the finale are now just redundant because Daenerys goes mad and stuff like that. Her whole journey. I felt so sorry for the Unsullied when you see right at the end when Jon is like walking to the boat and you see Grey Worm and all the Unsullied and he's just like, right, we sail for Karth then. And it was in that moment I thought, oh God, this must be so devastating for them. Like they've spent years like invested in this idea, and for them, it's all for nothing. It's all over. They lost effectively. But I quickly wanted to continuing with Jamie, or I should say finishing with Jamie. I felt like they could have ended it quite nicely as well, because when Euron just so happens to drag up onto the beach at the same time that Jamie gets there. And I felt like, in retrospect, when I was thinking about it more, I thought, oh my God, it would have been so much better if they perhaps didn't get all the rubble buried on them, but or that they meet downstairs in the basement as all the rubble is like falling, and then Euron turns up. And then it would have been Cersei, Jamie, and Euron. And they could have had this brilliant sort of love triangle going on where like Euron's like, come on, come with me. And Cersei's like, Jamie, kill him. He's a horrible, dangerous man. And then Euron could have said like, why would you want to kill me when I've just put a prince in your belly? And then Jamie could be like, what? And then Cersei could like effectively rebut with, no, Euron, it was never your baby. It was Jamie's. And then that could have been the fuel to get Euron to fight Jamie, and for Jamie to have the fuel to be like, I'm going to defend Cersei, because Euron could have then been like, oh, you fucking bitch, I'm going to kill you then instead. And then they could have had a really epic fight in the same way that Clegane Bowl happened. And then, Euron could like be like killed in the way that he was, like mortally wounded, and so could Jamie. And then the rubble could have buried on them per se, because Cersei can't lift Jamie, and then Cersei's like, no, I'm going to stay with you, or something like that. But also, something I really wanted to mention in honor of, I did think Euron in the end was pretty great. Like when he's laying there and he turns over and he goes, I'm the man who killed the Kingslayer. It dawned on me in that moment that I was like, yeah, and you fucking killed a dragon, and you slept with the queen, and you were the head of the Iron Fleet. Like, if that man had survived the war, he would have gone down as like one of the greatest accomplished men in the history of Westeros, right? He would have been a hero. He has done so much that no man has ever done. I sort of thought, holy crap. I know book Euron is absolutely insidiously amazing, and I've never been that much of a fan of TV Euron, but that ending I thought was great. I felt like I had to dedicate a minute to him of just like, I really appreciated that scene.
Well, sure. I'm fine with it just existing as it was, to be perfectly honest, because I mean, I'm sure I would have been far happier if Euron had just been left dead in the water. The sort of what is dead may never die thing, almost him dying in the water would have made more poetic sense, sure. But he does come out of the water to kill Jamie. Like, I know that sounds kind of like...
It's a bit lame.
Shallow. It sounds shallow.
Oh God!
But,
get him out of there.
I was fine with him coming out and doing his thing. I'm just trying to think how to swallow the notion that he had done a lot and then just died in that little cove. Because you're right, he has had a significant role to play.
He's had quite the bucket list.
Yeah, at the same time, and I kind of wish this the same in the books as well. I just wish that he had been kind of introduced earlier and had more of an influence earlier.
I wish he was a character like someone like Jorah or someone like Davos, someone who was never a main character, but always we saw him there, like he was around.
Yeah. Now you might have to correct me on this because I honestly can't remember. But so if we think back to series 3, number 3, where you've got Ramsay being basically introduced as Joffrey is at the peak of his power.
Yeah.
Now, as Joffrey gets sort of removed from the story, Ramsay then slowly becomes the next bad guy.
I see where you're going with this.
The pinnacle of evil. Now, in the same way, I just wish that Euron had the same kind of introduction that Ramsay had in order for me to instinctively think, for me to just think, right, well, yeah, he's the next evil guy. But then we have the fight, we have Clegane Bowl, which just kind of makes Euron look really
a bit redundant.
Pathetic. Yeah. But yeah, I that's all I really had to say on Euron. I think
it was an end that I felt like could have been a bit better, but nonetheless needed to be mentioned. So I think it's fitting for us to perhaps end this podcast on the end of Game of Thrones. How did you feel about Bran becoming king? How did you feel about Jon going up to the wall? And how did you feel about the North becoming a separate kingdom?
Well, this is like the last 20 minutes of the episode, isn't it? We had a lot to kind of
last 20 minutes of Game of Thrones.
I know. But I mean, like I was satisfied, and I was kind of at the point of, okay, let's just see how it unfolds. I wasn't really kind of wanting it to go in one way or the other, because everything that had happened that needed to happen had happened. But to have that kind of put on at the end, I was quite happy with Bran being the king, in all honesty. I didn't think that it made sense to me, just because I'm one of these people that thinks that a king should be wise. And the most of wisdom comes from knowing as much about the past as you possibly can get, and who better to pick than Bran, he's no longer Bran, but you know what I mean. What's his new?
The Three-Eyed Raven.
The Three-Eyed Raven. Yeah, I don't know why I forgot that in that moment, but that he is now the king. I was happy as well with it being that way, just because I know that the Three-Eyed Raven has kind of been a force not of good or bad, but has been so mysterious the whole time that we can't really make a judgment yet as well whether he'll be a good king or not. That's just my 2 cents on it. But I was more frustrated about the fact that we had all of these sort of sub-characters all sitting around in King's Landing. And when Tully, the guy, just gets like interrupted, and it's that awkward silence, and he has to sit back down again. And I was just thinking, like, Sansa, that's your uncle, your mum's brother. Like, are you seriously gonna just like backhand him verbally like that? And
I really thought that sentence was going to be that he stands up, gives all these like speeches about how great he is, and then I thought it was going to end with him going, and for that reason I choose Sansa Stark, or something like that. I really wasn't expecting that speech he was doing for him to actually be seriously saying, and therefore I should be king. I thought it was going to be, and therefore I choose Jon Snow, or I choose, someone. I felt it was a little bit like it, I think they did it for the comedy factor, but I felt it was a bit out of place. Like, this is like the last scenes. Yeah, right. This is the last scenes of Game of Thrones, and it was just like, oh, come on, dude. But I have to respectfully disagree with you on Bran. Everything that you said makes sense if he was someone like the Grand Maester. The Grand Maester is someone of pure wisdom and knowledge. The problem is exactly what you said. He's not good, and he's not like bad. He's a force of neutral. He's so apathetic that surely he doesn't really care about the seven kingdoms, or the 6 kingdoms as it now is. Like, isn't the entire point of him where he's sort of saying, I am not Bran anymore, I am the Three-Eyed Raven, and everything that he knows is about the past? Like, it's like asking a god to be in charge of a kingdom. It's so below him. I just wouldn't have thought that he'd give a shit, you know? And I would have thought that, he sort of makes it very clear that he doesn't really care. He just knows that things are going to happen. Well, surely you need a ruler to be loving to his subjects. And Bran certainly isn't that. Bran is I know to some people, and I might agree with it, Bran might be the worst person to be in charge of the Seven Kingdoms on purely the fact that he doesn't care about the Seven Kingdoms. He never has cared about the Seven Kingdoms, even when in the preparation for the Long Night, he's like talking to Tyrion, and Tyrion's saying like something. He says something along the lines of like, "Oh, if like after tomorrow, I would want to do this or that," and Bran just says, "How do you know there is going to be a tomorrow?" It's just like he doesn't care. He really doesn't care about what happens. Theon, like, he gives him like a half-hearted "thank you, Theon," but that's more for like Theon's gratitude. I don't think Bran is truly thanking Theon. I think Bran is in his mind going, "Oh, Theon would really like me to thank him right now. That would make him feel at ease. That would make him feel happy." And the entire time he's just sat there, emotionless, uncaring about the world around him. And I feel like that would impact on running a kingdom where you're meant to like care about him. And I understand that like that's where the king's hand would come in and stuff like that. But I appreciated the twist.
Yeah.
I appreciated that it wasn't Jon Snow or Daenerys or or whatever. But I just, again, same with Arya killing the Night King. I felt like that twist was a little bit sort of, really?
I think it was maybe I'm a bit swayed over by the whole "he knew it all along" kind of trope at this point, because that is something that the Bloodraven, the Three-Eyed Raven, is now kind of dependent on using as an excuse for everything that happens and everything he does. But at the same time, I think it's kind of like when we talk about the neutrality of this character, and a quote that sticks in my mind is when Varys says, when a Targaryen is born, a coin is flipped or something like that. And I don't know if this has all been confirmed yet or anything, but I remember there being like a theory about who Bloodraven originally was, and that he was in fact a Targaryen. So the fact that a Targaryen being embodied within a Stark is now the king of the Seven Kingdoms is almost exactly the same as if we had Jon Snow become the king, and that we really haven't got that much of a different resolution than, like I say, if Jon had been crowned. I think that's something else that kind of clicked with me when they announced it, because I was thinking, now we have a Targaryen / Stark on the throne. And I know that it's kind of been demolished that there is any Bran left, but there is something to be said about the fact that it's come kind of full circle again, that we can potentially have a Targaryen back on the throne in the first place, which I don't know. I kind of saw it more as a positive thing, perhaps, in that regard. But yeah, I'm fine with it.
It definitely wasn't terrible by any means. There was just a few sort of hints of. It was very bittersweet though that Jon didn't get on the throne. It was sort of like the fact that he had to go back to the wall and stuff like that. It was. It was the pure embodiment of bittersweet in my mind. It was like, wow, what an ending for such an epic character, for him to just end up where he started, and with no real reward or anything like that. But at the same time, it was like, I guess it's quite poetic type thing. But
well, yeah, even him going beyond the wall at the end to join the
wildlings.
Yeah, I'm totally happy with that as well, because we now, if you think about Mance Rayder, who was also he was the leader of them as well, but simultaneously was part of the Night's Watch beforehand. And I don't know. I think that I'm sure if Jon goes beyond the wall now to live out the rest of his life, that's going to be perfectly fine. And maybe he'll become another strange ice being over the coming winter. But it was a bit strange that he did move up there, especially considering that it's going to be even colder than it was when he went up there during the summer. I mean, I'm sure it's not just the weather that he's going up there for, but you know what I mean?
It's true. Well, does that about wrap it up for us? I mean,
we've been talking for longer than we even intended, and I think we have covered absolutely everything, man.
Well, in that case, once again, if in the comment section, give us your feedback. This is still going to be the second one that's been uploaded, and we're happy to keep on making adjustments as and when we were. We know that the last one was very long, and we have made an effort to make this one shorter as per some suggestions and requests. Keep them coming, and we'll keep on trying to improve them. Isn't that right?
Absolutely.
Well, it was a pleasure, and that was us catching up on the Catching Up podcast. Well, lovely as always.